In the coastal town of Joppa, where the Mediterranean waves kissed the sandy shores, there lived a woman named Dorcas, also known as Tabitha. She wasn't a ruler or a scholar, but her name was spoken with admiration throughout the town. Dorcas was a seamstress, her hands skilled with needle and thread, but her true talent lay in her heart, a heart devoted to kindness and generosity. Her home was modest, with simple wooden furniture and a loom that stood in the corner of the main room. Bolts of colorful fabric were stacked neatly along the walls, waiting to be transformed into garments. Dorcas worked tirelessly, not for wealth or recognition, but for the joy of helping those in need. Each morning she prayed, her voice soft but filled with conviction. Lord, guide my hands and my heart. Let everything I do bring honor to you and help those who need it most. The streets of Joppa were bustling with activity as fishermen hauled their nets, merchants bartered over goods, and children played under the warm sun. Dorcas moved among them with purpose, her basket filled with freshly sewn garments. She knew the faces of the needy, widows who had no one to care for them, children without warm clothes, and travelers who had fallen on hard times. For each one, she had something to give, a cloak, a tunic, or a comforting word. Tabitha, a frail widow named Leah, called out one day as Dorcas passed her door. "Bless you for this tunic. I have never been so warm on a cold night." Dorcas smiled, her eyes twinkling with joy. "Leah, it's the Lord who provides. I'm just his servant." But Dorcas's generosity didn't end with her sewing. She often invited people into her home, sharing her humble meals of bread and fish. Her table was a place of laughter and hope, where burdens felt lighter and hearts grew stronger. One evening, as she prepared a meal, a young woman named Miriam knocked on the door. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with worry. "Dorcas," she said, her voice trembling, "my son is ill, and I have no money for medicine." Without hesitation, Dorcas reached for a small pouch of coins. "Take this," she said, pressing it into Miriam's hand, "and come back tomorrow for a warm meal. You're not alone in this." Word of Dorcas's kindness spread quickly, and her home became a beacon of hope in Joppa. Yet she remained humble, often brushing off praise. "It's not me," she would say. "It's the Lord working through me. I'm just a thread in his great tapestry." Her friends marveled at her strength and compassion. Among them was a fisherman named Jonas, who often helped carry her heavy baskets of fabric. "Tabitha," he said one day, "you're like the sunrise. You brighten everyone's life." Dorcas laughed softly. "Then may the sunrise remind us all of God's love, Jonas," she said. But as the days turned to weeks, Dorcas began to notice a heaviness in her heart. Her work continued, and her smile never wavered, but a sense of fatigue crept over her. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on the needs of others. One night, as she sat by the fire, mending a tear in a cloak, she paused to pray. "Lord, I'm tired," she whispered, "but there's still so much to do. Give me the strength to continue." Little did she know, her faith and service would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. As dawn broke over Joppa, the town stirred to life. But in Dorcas's home, the air was still. She lay in her bed, her breathing shallow and her face pale. Her friends gathered around her, exchanged worried glances. "What will we do without her?" one widow whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We must call for Peter," Jonas said firmly. "He's in Lydda, not far from here. If anyone can help, it's him." The women nodded, their hope clinging to the name of the apostle. The streets of Joppa were unusually quiet. The usual buzz of market life replaced by whispers and somber faces. Word had spread that Dorcas, the beloved seamstress and helper of the poor, had fallen gravely ill. In her modest home, a small group of women gathered, their hands wringing cloth and their eyes filled with tears. Dorcas lay motionless on her simple bed, her once lively face now pale and still. Miriam, the young mother Dorcas had helped not long ago, sat by her bedside clutching her hand. "She gave everything for others," Miriam said, her voice breaking. "She never asked for anything in return. What will we do without her?" Jonas, the fisherman, stood near the doorway, his head bowed. "We can't let her story end like this," he said firmly. "We must call for Peter. He's in Lydda. If anyone can help, it's him." The decision was made and Jonas set off immediately. The journey to Lydda was not far, but every moment felt like an eternity. As he walked, he prayed silently, his heart heavy with both sorrow and hope. When he arrived, he found Peter surrounded by a crowd, teaching about Jesus and healing the sick. Jonas pushed his way through, desperation in his voice. "Peter," he said, his breath ragged, "please, you must come to Joppa. Dorcas, a woman loved by all, has passed away. We need you." Peter looked at him with compassion. "Take me to her," he said simply. Back in Joppa, the atmosphere was one of quiet mourning. The women who had been touched by Dorcas's kindness gathered in her home, sharing stories of her generosity. They laid out the garments she had made, tunics, cloaks, and scarves, each piece a testament to her love and service. "Look at this," one widow said, holding up a finely woven shawl. "She made this for me when I couldn't afford anything to keep me warm." Another added, "And this tunic, she stayed up all night sewing it for my son." Their voices were filled with both sorrow and gratitude, their memories weaving together a picture of a life well lived. When Peter arrived with Jonas, the women crowded around him, their faces pleading. "Come and see Peter," Miriam said, leading him to Dorcas's bedside. "She gave everything for us. Surely God will not let her light go out." Peter entered the small room and knelt beside Dorcas's bed. The women followed, watching in silence as the apostle bowed his head in prayer. "Lord," Peter whispered, "you know this woman's heart. You know the lives she has touched. Show your power here, that all may see and believe in you." Peter stood and gently motioned for the women to leave the room. Though hesitant, they obeyed, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Outside the door, they clung to one another, whispering prayers and hoping for a miracle. Inside, Peter turned to Dorcas's still form. "Tabitha," he said, using her Hebrew name, "get up." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, slowly, Dorcas's eyes fluttered open. She blinked, taking in her surroundings, and when her gaze landed on Peter, she sat up, her expression one of quiet wonder. Peter helped her to her feet, and together they stepped out of the room. Gasps and cries of joy erupted as the women saw her, alive and well. Miriam rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Dorcas," she cried, embracing her tightly, "you're alive!" The small house was soon filled with laughter, tears, and praise. News of the miracle spread quickly, and people from all over Joppa came to see the woman who had been restored to life. That evening, as the crowd dispersed, Dorcas sat with Miriam, Jonas, and the others who had been by her side. "Why did you come for Peter?" she asked softly. Jonas smiled. "Because you've given so much to us. We couldn't bear to lose you." Dorcas's eyes filled with tears. Then I will spend the rest of my days continuing to serve the Lord and His people, she said. For as long as He gives me breath, I will honor Him with my hands and my heart. The news of Dorcas's miraculous return spread through Joppa like wildfire. From the market stalls to the fishing docks, people spoke in hushed tones and joyful exclamations about the woman who had been restored to life. It wasn't long before the entire town seemed to converge on her modest home, eager to see her and hear the story for themselves. Dorcas, now fully recovered, greeted each visitor with her signature warmth and humility. Though she was grateful for their kind words, she redirected the praise to where it truly belonged. "This was not my doing," she told the crowd gathered in her small courtyard. "It was the power of the Lord, working through His servant Peter. My life has been returned to me, and I owe it all to Him." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Dorcas sat outside with Jonas, Miriam, and several others who had been by her side during her illness. The firelight flickered across their faces, and the mood was one of quiet reflection. "Dorcas," Jonas began, "do you remember anything from when you were gone?" Dorcas paused, her gaze thoughtful. "It's hard to explain," she said. "There was peace, a deep, overwhelming peace. It felt as though I was resting in the presence of the Lord. And then, suddenly, I heard Peter's voice calling my name, and I opened my eyes." The group fell silent, each person contemplating her words. "Your return is a miracle," Miriam said softly. "It's a sign that God's not finished with you yet." Dorcas smiled. "Then I will spend every moment He's given me serving Him and His people." The days that followed were filled with purpose. Dorcas returned to her work with renewed energy, her hands stitching garments with precision and care. But now, her efforts extended beyond meeting physical needs. She began teaching others the skills she had honed over the years, empowering widows and the poor to support themselves. "You don't just need a tunic," she told a young woman one afternoon. "You need the ability to make one yourself. Let me teach you." The woman nodded eagerly, and soon Dorcas's home became a hub of activity. Women from all over Joppa gathered there, not only to learn, but to hear her story of God's power and grace. The transformation wasn't limited to Dorcas's home. Her miraculous return sparked a revival in Joppa. People who had once been indifferent to the message of Jesus now came to the believers, seeking to know more about the God who could bring the dead back to life. One man, a fisherman named Caleb, approached Jonas one evening as they worked on their nets by the shore. "Jonas," Caleb said hesitantly, "I've heard the stories about Dorcas. Is it true?" Jonas looked up, his expression serious. "It's true," he said. "I was there when she passed, and I was there when Peter prayed and brought her back. It's the power of Jesus, Caleb. He's the Son of God, and His power is greater than anything we can imagine." Caleb nodded slowly. "I've lived my whole life doubting, but now, I don't know. Maybe it's time I stopped doubting and started believing." As the weeks turned into months, Dorcas's influence continued to grow. Her story reached beyond Joppa, inspiring believers in other towns and drawing attention to the power of God at work in the lives of ordinary people. But with her newfound notoriety came challenges. Some skeptics dismissed her story, claiming it was exaggerated or fabricated. Others, envious of the attention she received, whispered rumors behind her back. Dorcas, however, remained steadfast. She prayed for those who doubted and forgave those who spoke against her, trusting that God's truth would prevail. One day, As she worked on a cloak for a young boy in need, a group of travelers arrived at her home. They had come from a distant city, drawn by the stories of her kindness and the miracle that had brought her back to life. "Tabitha," one of them said, using her Hebrew name, "we've heard of your faith and your work. Will you come with us to share your story and teach others how to serve the Lord as you do?" Dorcas looked at the travelers, her heart swelling with both gratitude and humility. She knew the Lord was calling her to something greater, but leaving Joppa would not be easy. "I will pray about it," she said, "and if the Lord wills it, I will go." That night, as she knelt by her bed, Dorcas prayed fervently. "Lord," she said, "you have given me a second chance at life. Show me how to use it for your glory. If you want me to stay, I will stay. If you want me to go, I will go." The peace she felt as she rose from her prayer was unmistakable. She knew that whatever lay ahead, the Lord would guide her steps. The air in Joppa was filled with anticipation as word spread that Dorcas might leave to share her story beyond their town. People who had been touched by her kindness and generosity felt a mix of emotions: pride in the woman who had become a beacon of hope, and sadness at the thought of her departure. Dorcas herself wrestled with the decision. Though her heart longed to follow where God was leading, the thought of leaving her home, her friends, and the community she loved so dearly weighed heavily on her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Dorcas gathered her closest friends in her home. Miriam, Jonas, and several others sat around her modest table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of an oil lamp. "I've been praying," Dorcas began, her voice steady but laced with emotion, "and I believe the Lord is calling me to go." A hush fell over the room. Jonas, who had been her steadfast supporter, leaned forward. "Are you certain, Dorcas?" he asked gently. "Your work here has changed so many lives." Dorcas nodded. "And that's why I must go. The Lord has given me a second chance at life, and I believe it's not just for me. There are others who need to hear about His power and love." The days that followed were a flurry of activity. As Dorcas prepared for her journey, the travelers who had come to invite her waited patiently, assisting her in gathering supplies and preparing her home for her absence. Before she left, Dorcas visited each person she had helped, offering words of encouragement and blessings. To Leah, the widow who had been among her first recipients of kindness, she gave a final tunic. "This is for you," Dorcas said, placing the garment in Leah's hands. "Wear it, and remember that God's love surrounds you always." Leah, tears streaming down her face, embraced her. "I will never forget what you've done for me, Dorcas. May the Lord go with you." On the morning of her departure, the entire town of Joppa gathered to bid her farewell. The streets were lined with people holding the garments she had made, a sea of colorful fabric that testified to her impact. Children waved, their smiles bittersweet, and women whispered prayers for her safety. Jonas, standing at the front of the crowd, approached Dorcas as she prepared to leave. "You've taught us more than you'll ever know," he said. "But most importantly, you've shown us what it means to love like Christ." Dorcas smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "And you've shown me what it means to have faith in a community. Keep serving one another, Jonas. The Lord will bless you for it." The journey was long and filled with challenges, but Dorcas embraced each moment as an opportunity to trust God. She shared her story with everyone she met: innkeepers, merchants, travelers, all of whom listened with wide-eyed wonder. One evening, as they camped under a canopy of stars, one of the travelers asked her, "Dorcas, what drives you to do all this? To leave your home and travel to places you've never been?" Dorcas looked at the man, her voice firm but full of warmth. Because I was dead, and now I'm alive. The Lord gave me a second chance, and I can't waste it. If my story brings even one person closer to Him, then every step of this journey will be worth it. When they arrived in the first town on their route, Dorcas was welcomed with open arms. Her reputation had preceded her, and people gathered to hear her speak. She stood before the crowd, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. I am not here because of my own strength, she began. I am here because of the Lord's power and mercy. He took a simple seamstress from Joppa and gave her a new life, not for her own sake, but to show His love to the world. The crowd listened intently as she shared the story of her life, death, and miraculous return. Many were moved to tears, their hearts stirred by her words. Meanwhile, back in Joppa, her legacy continued to grow. The women she had taught began their own ministries, sewing garments for the poor and sharing the message of God's love. Jonas organized a group of fishermen to provide food for widows and orphans, inspired by Dorcas's example. One day, Miriam gathered the children in the village and told them Dorcas's story. She may not be here, Miriam said, but her love and kindness remain. Let us honor her by living as she taught us, serving others with joy and humility. As Dorcas traveled from town to town, she felt the Lord's presence guiding her every step. She knew the journey would not be easy, but she trusted that God's plan was far greater than she could imagine. One evening, as she knelt in prayer under the open sky, she whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for using me, even in my weakness. Let every word I speak and every act of kindness I offer point others to you." Her prayer was simple, but it carried the weight of her devotion, a devotion that would continue to inspire all who heard her story. Dorcas's journey continued, taking her to distant towns and villages where her reputation as a healer of hearts and lives had already spread. Each place she visited welcomed her with open arms, eager to hear her story and learn from her example. Yet, her path was not without its trials. One afternoon, while traveling through a dense forested area with her companions, a sudden storm swept in. The sky darkened, and rain poured down in heavy sheets, soaking them to the bone. Thunder rolled overhead, and the group sought shelter under a rocky overhang. Dorcas shivered from the cold, her cloak clinging to her. "The Lord will see us through," she said, her voice steady despite the harsh conditions. "Let us pray for safety and strength." The group huddled together, their whispered prayers mingling with the sound of the rain. After what felt like hours, the storm began to subside, and a faint rainbow appeared in the sky. "Even in the storm, His promises shine through," Dorcas said, pointing to the rainbow. Her words lifted their spirits, and they pressed on. In one bustling market town, Dorcas encountered a challenge that tested her faith in a new way. The town was home to a wealthy merchant named Dathan, who had heard of her miraculous return to life. However, he was skeptical and openly mocked her story. "Surely this is nothing more than a clever tale," Dathan scoffed as a crowd gathered to listen. "No one comes back from the dead. What proof do you have?" Dorcas remained calm, her expression one of compassion rather than anger. "The proof is in the lives that have been touched," she said. "The garments I sewed, the hungry I fed, the love I shared. It's not about me, but about the Lord working through me." Dathan sneered. "Words are easy. Let's see if your faith can back them up." Despite his mockery, Dorcas's response was gracious. Perhaps one day you'll see that the Lord's power is greater than our understanding, she said. That evening, as the townspeople gathered in a small meeting hall, Dorcas spoke with conviction. She shared her story once again, emphasizing the transformative power of God's love. Even when others doubt, even when trials come, His love remains steadfast, she said. I stand before you not because of my own strength, but because the Lord chose to give me life again. I owe everything to Him. Her words moved many in the audience to tears, and several approached her afterward to thank her. Among them was a young woman named Talia, who had been struggling with despair after the loss of her husband. Your story has given me hope, Talia said, her voice trembling. I thought I had nothing left to live for, but now I see that God's plan is greater than my pain. Dorcas embraced her, offering words of comfort and encouragement. As the days turned to weeks, Dorcas's journey became a tapestry of challenges and triumphs. In one village, she helped establish a small workshop where widows could learn to sew and provide for themselves. In another, she organized a community meal that brought people together, healing old wounds and fostering unity. Her companions marveled at her resilience and unwavering faith. Dorcas, one of them said one evening as they rested by a campfire, how do you keep going, even when the road is so hard? Dorcas smiled, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Because I know that my life is not my own, she said. The Lord gave it back to me, and I will use every moment to serve Him and His people. Yet even as she worked tirelessly, there were moments of doubt and weariness. One night as she knelt in prayer, she whispered, Lord, am I doing enough? Am I walking the path you've set before me? In the stillness, she felt a deep peace wash over her, as if God Himself was answering her. You are enough, she murmured, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Lord, for your faithfulness. As she prepared to leave the town, a group of villagers gathered to bid her farewell. Talia, the young widow, approached her with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. This is for you, Talia said, handing it to Dorcas. It's a garment I made, inspired by your teachings. I wanted you to have something to remember us by. Dorcas unfolded the cloth to reveal a beautifully sewn tunic. Tears filled her eyes as she embraced Talia. I will treasure this always, she said. As Dorcas and her companions set out once more, the moonlight illuminating their path, she reflected on the journey so far. The trials had been many, but the blessings were greater still. Her life was a testament to the power of God's love, and she was determined to share that love with everyone she met. The journey back to Joppa was bittersweet for Dorcas. Her travels had been filled with incredible moments of faith, unexpected challenges, and countless lives touched by the story of her miraculous return. Yet, as she approached the familiar hills surrounding her home, a wave of emotion swept over her. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the rooftops of Joppa. As Dorcas and her companions entered the town, they were met with a heartwarming sight. Villagers lined the streets, waving and calling out greetings. Many held garments she had sewn or items inspired by her teachings. It was clear that Dorcas's legacy had flourished in her absence. When she arrived at her modest home, Jonas and Miriam were waiting at the gate. Their faces lit up with joy as they embraced her. Dorcas, Miriam said, her voice trembling. It's so good to have you home. The town hasn't been the same without you. Jonas nodded. But your influence has remained. The workshops you started, the lessons you taught, they've grown into something extraordinary. Dorcas's eyes filled with tears as she looked around. The village buzzed with activity, and she could see the fruits of her labor everywhere. Women gathered in small groups, sewing and sharing stories. Children played in the streets, wearing clothes that had been made with love and care. That evening, a celebration was held in her honor. The courtyard of her home was filled with laughter and music as the townspeople came together to welcome her back. Jonas stood to address the crowd, his voice filled with pride. Dorcas's story is a testament to the power of faith, generosity, and God's love, he said. She has shown us what it means to live a life of service, and we are all better for it. Dorcas, humbled by the outpouring of love, stood to speak. I am grateful for each of you, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her chest. But let us remember that everything we've built, every blessing we've received comes from the Lord. He has been with us every step of the way. In the days that followed, Dorcas settled back into her home, but her work was far from over. She continued to mentor the women of Joppa, teaching them not only the practical skills of sewing, but also the deeper values of compassion and faith. One day, as she sat with a group of young women, she noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was Talia, the young widow from the distant village. Talia! Dorcas exclaimed, rising to greet her. What brings you to Joppa? Talia smiled, holding up a bundle of garments. I wanted to thank you again, Dorcas. Your teachings have changed my life. I've started a workshop in my village, and we've been able to help so many in need. These are for you, a small token of our gratitude. Dorcas took the garments, her heart swelling with pride and joy. You've done exactly what the Lord calls us to do, she said. You've taken His blessings and multiplied them. I couldn't be prouder. As time went on, Dorcas's influence continued to grow. Her story inspired people not only in Joppa, but in towns and villages far and wide. Travelers came to hear her speak, and many left with a renewed sense of purpose and faith. One evening, as she sat by the fire with Jonas and Miriam, Dorcas reflected on her journey. Do you ever wonder why God chose me? She asked softly. Jonas smiled. Because you were willing. You opened your heart and your hands to serve, and He worked through you. Miriam nodded. Your life has shown us all what it means to be faithful, even in the face of trials. That's why He chose you. As the years passed, Dorcas's story became a cornerstone of Joppa's history. Her humility, faith, and generosity were celebrated by those who had been touched by her life. And though she eventually passed away, her legacy lived on in the lives of the people she had served and inspired. Her name was spoken with reverence, and her story was told to future generations as a reminder of God's power and the impact of a single life dedicated to His service. One evening, long after the streets of Joppa had grown quiet, Miriam stood at the edge of the sea, looking out at the horizon. She whispered a prayer of gratitude for her friend and mentor, whose life had changed so many. As the waves lapped at the shore, it seemed as though the very heavens were echoing the impact of Dorcas's life, a life lived in service, faith, and unwavering love for God and His people.